Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Schmoozin with Forouzan. I am especially excited for our guest here today, Mr. Steve Fiechter. Steve is the Senior Director of PATH, People Assisting the Homeless, specifically for the metropolitan Los Angeles area. And this is near and dear to my heart. When I went to the University of Southern California, I did a organizational chart on PATH, trying to assist them in getting more donations, so on and so forth. As I was doing that, and as I was researching the organization, I fell in love with it. And I'll tell you guys why. There's people who say, hey, you need to help the homeless, or people experiencing homeless with shelter. Or there's people who say, hey, if people are experiencing homelessness, we need to get them jobs. And you can have all these different views. PATH does all of it. PATH not only helps people in terms of a shelter, but they have these things that I call workshops. I think Steve is going to give us a better idea as to how that works, to get them not just off the streets, but into jobs, into interviews and things like that. It's literally a path out of homelessness. And I really appreciate that. So I'm very happy to have Steve here. Steve, how are you today, sir?
I'm well, and thank you so much. I'm really delighted to be here and to share this time with you today and answer questions and get to talk about something I'm obviously passionate about. And I know our whole organization is clearly designed to address and help our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, very, very timely. I've been following you guys since I was in college, and now we have the podcast, and we have a situation in Los Angeles where a lot of people seem to be experiencing homelessness. And I'll get into the nitty-gritty about LA in just a bit. Let's start by talking about PATH, who you guys are, what you're doing. Why is PATH just different from a shelter?
Sure, glad to. And maybe I'll put a pin in some of our history, and that can help folks understand, kind of where we started and what drives us today. So, good over 3 decades ago, some folks on the west side of LA, led by some faith leaders and community leaders, really saw a need to assist those people who are experiencing homelessness there. This was obviously decades before the crisis that we're sort of engaged in now. And they began by reaching out with some supplies and support of food and water and other things like that. Over the years, that's developed as we've paid attention to the needs of people and the effectiveness of what kind of supports really do help people, not to stay where they are, but to help move them from those crisis places through intervention and support, case management, connecting people to resources, to move them from those experiences of homelessness, however they got there and whatever's going on for them individually, into a permanent home. So you mentioned earlier, we are boots on the ground outreach workers who are reaching out to our neighbors experiencing homelessness, sometimes living on the streets, in tents, in encampments, individually, riding on metro or in an RV or a camper or something, whether they've been that way for decades or some just recently. Outreaching and then connecting them to the programs and support that would help them move toward permanent housing, framed in what we call a housing first model. And that really is something that's an evidence-based approach that says that without that safe space we call home where people can land, they really can't begin to work on all of the other things that might be issues for them individually, whether that's a mental health challenge, a physical health challenge, a substance abuse challenge, or simply the need to get some job training or go on an interview. How's someone supposed to do that when they're living in their vehicle? How are they supposed to present themselves in a way that will get them hired into a position that would then help them regain permanent housing. So whatever it takes is one of our monikers at PATH as we move and walk alongside, accompany people through that process into permanent housing. And then some folks who may need continuation of support while they're in permanent housing, be that for a mental health or physical health challenge, those folks who may never be able to work independently or maybe on some sort of other public resource. We continue to provide case management support. Over the years, PATH has also developed permanent supportive housing ourselves. So we have a whole arm of our organization now called PATH Ventures that works with community resources and looks to build permanent support and housing for people who have experienced homelessness. And then we provide case management support on those in those sites. So scattered throughout Los Angeles and now throughout California, since PATH started 3 decades ago. Here in metropolitan Los Angeles, we've now expanded and have boots on the ground and permanent supportive housing from San Diego all the way to San Jose. So we're engaged in the process and have become really a national leader in the addressing of and supporting people who are experiencing homelessness. Sorry for the long ramble there.
No, that's great. I think people need to hear this stuff. I think more people, I wish PATH was a household name. I think it should be. I think if you live in Los Angeles, whether you're the type who is empathizing with the homeless situation or whether you're the type who has, some reservations about what's going on in the city, everyone should know about your organization because your organization is assisting with those exact issues. So let's talk about big picture. We have beds, we have shelters, but then we have, I called it workshops. You had a different name for it. What was it?
Well, we do case management support for people, and that's a big term in social services, but it basically means that we connect people wherever they are, both physically, but also mentally, emotionally, historically, whether they're unemployed or in need of support or services, whether they show up on our doorstep without even an identification, or they're someone who's recently become homeless and just needs a kind of a boost up into a permanent housing. Maybe a security deposit is all that's between them and a permanent home. So whatever that is, our case managers are out there connecting with people, engaging with them, and that's a process sometimes that takes some time. We don't force services on people or insist that they follow our direction, but we accompany people on a pathway that will lead them first into a permanent home and then toward healing and wholeness. Wellness is one of the terms we use. So along the way, we most certainly do connect people to educational resources, workshops, and things like that will assist them in growing and connecting and getting the help that they need. But overall, the work that we do is typically referred to as case management.
Okay. I would love to really delve into the details of case management. I think when I say shelter, people know what shelters are. People appreciate what beds are. I will ask, do you have a rough estimate as to how many beds or shelters that PATH currently has available in Los Angeles?
It's well over 200. And so my umbrella as the director here in metropolitan Los Angeles is over our 6 shelters that are in this vicinity. We actually have a few others nearby, but roughly 250 to 300 beds in Los Angeles right now. Now, some of that is due to the COVID pandemic and the reduction of the numbers of people that we can squeeze into those corporate sites, if you will, those spaces where people are living in community closely. We want to be following as best as we can the directives of the health services folks to ensure the safety of the people we're helping. But we do have hundreds of beds, and we also have connections to other shelters and other shelter providers in Los Angeles. Many have maybe heard of the Abridge Home program that the mayor of Los Angeles launched a few years back to have at least one shelter in each council district. Most council districts now have more than one. That's to engage people who are experiencing homelessness, to provide them that step out of homelessness into a congregate living setting where they're connected to case managers, where they're connected to services and support. In those sites, we most definitely have things like workshops. I was just at one of our sites today, and there's writers' workshops, and there's folks who can keep journals, or even simple things like game nights and community building events that give people a sense of safety and community, where if they've been experiencing homelessness for short or long periods of time, they're often traumatized by that experience. It's extraordinarily unsafe for people to live out on the streets. And also our teams, the outreach teams that work to engage people and then move them into interim settings, if that's appropriate for a person, or perhaps right into a permanent home, or perhaps reunifying them with family here in California or out of state. We have resources to be able to do all of those things. All of that is the work of our case management, our teams of case managers.
Okay, let me delve into this because I love to get into the nitty gritty. You said you had writing workshops?
Sure. So what we do is we encourage our case managers to tap into the skills and life experiences that they bring to the work that we do together. So if that is appropriate in a particular setting where we found we have people who have a propensity for art or writing or floral arranging or something, whatever it is, we're doing those things to provide, again, that normalization, that sense of growth, and the experience that there's hope beyond this, because those who've experienced homelessness, it's extraordinarily demeaning experience for people, and it's stigmatized, as we can dive into. Unfortunately, many people experiencing homelessness really experience this sense of the community turning its back on them, or kind of looking away in disgust, or not, or perhaps just frozen in terms of how they can help. There's encampments that have become more obvious, particularly in wake of the pandemic. That's in good measure because a lot of other activities have disappeared, and so we have that experience to notice on our streets, but also because of of some of the health directives to not disturb a lot of what's going on because of the concern about the spread of the virus. So we've seen some growth in encampments, but overall a decline in some measures in the numbers of folks experiencing homelessness. But we're definitely building on that, those experiences in our interim sites, or even in our permanent supportive housing sites where we have folks living together. There's always activities going on. There's always ways for people to connect, obviously safely in light of the pandemic, but to, again, normalize that experience, to build trust and rapport, and to help people feel safe. I just saw an amazing text message today to one of our case managers. We just were able to move someone from our shelter into a permanent home. And one of the lines they wrote was absolutely perfect. It's the first time I can recall in the longest time feeling safe. And that says it all, because how else can you work on all of these other, and they literally said that in the next sentence, I know I have other things to work on, but now I can do that because I'm in my home. So that's really where we're going when Path says, with our tagline, making it home, we're helping people to move into that direction as swiftly as possible, and as safely, and as kindly, as caringly, as lovingly. I mean, I use the word loving people back to health all the time. It seems a little odd at first, but really to connect with people with compassion is the way to help them and support them and help them feel human again.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. Let me say something. I think it's very easy, whether I'm driving around or other people are driving around and see these encampments and, oh man, this homeless issue, it's the people experiencing homeless, the issue is so terrible, this, that, and the other. For whatever eyesore you're putting up with in your community, the people who are actually experiencing the homelessness, I think we always have to be mindful. It's not an eyesore to them. It's a much bigger deal. And I think that you're pointing out safety. You're pointing out, I always looked at it from a standpoint of, and it's something that you alluded to, society turning its back on you. You can literally have this fancy Italian restaurant with a bunch of affluent people on one side of San Vicente Boulevard, and on the other side you have encampments with people who are far from being able to afford a meal, let alone a fancy meal. And I got to wonder, if I was experiencing homelessness and I look across the street and I see these people at the fancy restaurant, whereas I'm here in my encampment, that's going to have much smaller things, have deleterious psychological effects on people. I can only imagine going through that, what that must feel like. In a previous podcast that I did, as a gentleman by the name of R.Rex Paris, he does a lot of cognitive behavioral psychology and sciences. And he's actually the mayor of Lancaster, as a side note. And he actually was pointing out that, just poverty is a pressure that disables people from having all the opportunities they otherwise would. Mm-hmm. And, when you're thinking about where do I sleep? How do I get my next meal? There's a lot of other stuff you're not thinking about, things that might promote prosperity in your life and others. So when you pointed out that you have writing workshops, kind of made me feel warm in my heart. There's a sense of, if I'm coming from, sleeping on a bench, park bench, to, hey, this person actually wants me to participate in a writing workshop. There's a sense of like connection back to humanity that has.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you say love them back to health, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I have to be honest. I live in Los Angeles. I jog in Hollywood. I see the encampments. I have to jog into the streets sometimes, and I experience the feces on the sidewalk. And I understand that it's upsetting to people, and that there are health issues. And but you mentioned, I mean, I've literally seen people defecating in the street, and it occurs to me after my initial shock is they don't have anywhere to go. And I need to use a restroom several times a day. And I'm fortunate enough to have space to do that in a private place. What a horrible experience. And so how can we, continue to reach out and provide people safe space where they can, live and do their, we call them their ADLs, their daily life activities. It's just, you're right. I mean, right across the street from affluence, we have this abject poverty. Over 40% of people, the statistic shows, who experience homelessness have a serious mental health condition. The trauma and how that affects someone's brain and their decision-making process. I'm a mental health clinician, a licensed clinician by practice too. And I know that it's ridiculous to ask someone who's experienced extreme trauma, who's living in that post-stress place, to make rational choices, even though they look perfectly fine. So, we have to figure all those things out as we work with people and discover where they are in their journey and give them the support and the care and the healing spaces that they need. Interim housing is a tough thing to do, because it can be a little crazy, to be honest, but it's the space where people begin to heal, and they find safety and connection and humanity again. You mentioned writing workshop. We have a woman on one of our shelters, and we can talk about donations at some point too, because we could never do this work without the support of the community. One of our major donors is Trader Joe's, because they have a lot of stuff they're not allowed to sell after a certain amount of time. And so we're fortunate to be able to benefit from that. And they're so generous. And one of the things they're able to donate are flowers that, maybe they couldn't sell to the people who are eating at the fancy Italian restaurant. But we have a woman at one of our shelters, and she creates these gorgeous floral arrangements and plants the basil in the planters. And we have fresh herbs that we can use to cook with people. Our chefs work, tirelessly to create a dignified eating experience for people. One of our shelters opened in Hollywood, I sat with a gentleman who'd been homeless for over 20 years. And he's, a gentleman in his 50s who told me, I've been eating out of garbage cans for 20 years and I'm just tired. And I said, I'd be tired after about 3 minutes of that. What kind of skills and tenacity does a human being have to survive for that long? And how can we now give them the experience that they deserve as a living, breathing human being? Whatever got them to that space in their life, whatever addiction they're dealing with, mental health challenge, whatever good or bad choices they made, they're a human being. And how can we now meet them where they are and help them move into a place they can call home?
I appreciate that you're saying that donations are not just, there's more than one way to donate. And I do want to talk about donations and funding. Before we do that,
Okay.
I wanted to dive into the work that you do specifically. So this is what I want. This is people at home who are listening. This is the stuff that made me fall in love with this organization. So let's just start. We have the shelters, we have the beds, we've discussed that. You guys offer, showers and barber shops and haircuts. Is that correct as well?
Yeah, a while back, when Path was growing and has continued to grow, so I would say about 15, 20 years ago, the idea to create a space where people could come, a kind of a one-shop stop. It was called the Path Mall. And people could come in and they could get a haircut and a meal and a shower and connect to social services and get case management support, all in that setting. That particular model, interestingly enough, it was found after a while, was really kind of perpetuating people in their situation rather than connecting them to the permanent housing resources. So I mentioned that housing first model. That then came to the fore, and as an evidence-based model, was really the realization that the resources were better directed toward the creation of and the placement of people and the support of those people in permanent housing. Because the housing first model isn't just, here's your apartment, see you later. It's, here's your apartment. How do we now continue to support you so that you can maintain that in a healthy fashion, get along with your neighbors, work on your mental, physical, all of those other issues, get employed if that's something appropriate for you, all of those pieces. So yes, absolutely. Our outreach teams are helping people get connected to hygiene resources, to daily support, food resources, all of those pieces, employment and everything. But we're less, if you will, focused on that than we are moving them in as rapidly as we can. And keeping in mind that also reduces the amount of trauma they're experiencing on the streets. And I mentioned that before too. It's extraordinarily unsafe. While someone may have the impression that they're safer in their tent or they're finding some community in an encampment, the crime against people experiencing homelessness, against people with mental illness is far, you're far more likely to be a victim of a crime than you would be the perpetrator of that in those experiences. That's kind of the flip of the impression a lot of people have, that people are creating crime and so forth. Now, I'm not going to be a Pollyanna and say there is not a bad element of folk out there who are preying on people who are not criminally inclined, but the predominant number of people who experience homelessness, and again, over 40% of those people with serious mental health challenges are far more likely to be the victims than the perpetrator of any kind of ill-fated event.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing you point out. It's not to say that it can't be kind of dangerous on the streets. It's not to negate the existence of the danger, but hey, if you're the one focusing on that danger, imagine how much it affects the people who are living on the streets, right?
Yeah, and I sorry for going down that. I know you were asking a little bit more about the kinds of supports and things that we do.
Oh yeah.
So we're definitely, again, whatever it takes. So if someone is, ready to engage, but they're hungry for lunch, we're going to get them lunch, because I can't function without a good meal. I don't know about anybody else on here, but,
Coffee maybe.
And honest to goodness, if it's a pack of cigarettes or something that's going to engage someone and help them, because I'm not going to solve a nicotine addiction in 5 minutes and say, and I do want to emphasize too, the housing first model is what we call a low threshold or a low barrier approach. That is, you don't need to be sober to live in your own home. I'm not always sober in my own home. Nobody stops me from coming in at night. So why, in fact, they want me to be in a safe space. So why, housing needs to happen first. And we do whatever it takes then to help them maintain that housing and to become then healthier, whether that's sobriety, working on an addiction, working on a mental health challenge, getting connected to the Department of Mental Health and the mental health services that are available, medications if that's appropriate. All of those things. So it is literally the full gamut of human need and support for people through the whole process. And glory be if someone gets to a point in their life where they're saying, your case management is so helpful, and you guys got me in a house, and now my mental health is better, or I'm able to, and I don't need to see you ever again. We'd be like, that's great. But in the meantime, we're here if you need anything.
Let me see, so I can lay this out for the people who are watching. I really want to emphasize why you guys are so great, why you deserve donations. Just correct me if I'm wrong. I'm on the streets, and let's say I have a substance abuse issue. I come to you. Not only do you provide me with a meal, not only if you have the shelter available, do you allow me to get off the sidewalk or wherever it is that I'm at, but you give me a place to shower. I mean, goodness gracious, if I don't shower for a day, I'm not happy. I can only imagine what a shower must feel like to someone on the streets for weeks. So just ladies and gentlemen at home, just a shower, a small thing, just little things we take for granted. And then on top of that, I have heard things like resume workshops. You work with people on their resumes. You work with people on their interview skills. You actually put people in connection to have interviews taken. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And the thing that I also want to emphasize is we never do any of this in a vacuum. In Los Angeles in particular, but really everywhere we work, we're looking for partners and support that come to us from a variety of spaces, whether that's the private sector or public funding. The city of LA has a wonderful program that helps people experiencing homelessness connect to services like resume building and job search and things like that. We obviously work very closely with the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, with the Department of Health Services, both of whom oversee large swaths of the funding and the programming that's available to our neighbors experiencing homelessness. But we also work with other community organizations, business improvement districts, where we partner with them to do outreach in the streets, in particularly defined areas to obviously, we're coming at it from a different angle. Maybe a business improvement district, for example, is concerned about the effects of the people experiencing homelessness on businesses in the area, not without compassion toward the people who are experiencing homelessness. And we come in with that direct approach to those people. So we're able to partner with them through contracts and other support to help these people and get them connected to services. So it's everything and everyone. And we really want to say that, along with United Way here in LA and across the country, really, it is an everyone in situation. We really need to all as a community figure out how we can contribute to the transformation that happens, not only because we are in a system that allowed this to take place, but also now how do we build a fair and equitable future where people are cared for, where those folks with mental health challenges live in a community that embraces and helps support them and doesn't like run away in fear because someone's emoting on a subway platform or something. Sure, we want people to be safe, and we don't want people to rush out there and say, I know how to fix this, but really to engage the people who've been doing this work for decades to help figure out how we can continue to do this and expand what we do, learn from what we do. The Path Mall no longer exists because the resources shifted, because we, based on the evidence, saw that we needed to change, and we continue to do that, either by building permanent housing or looking into other alternatives now, like tiny homes, or even in parking lots that are transformed into safe space where someone can pitch a tent for the time being until they're connected to services and support, because they don't feel safe in a shelter. They've had a bad experience, or it's just uncomfortable for them, or they can't climb to the top of a bunk. Whatever it is that it is, we have to create this myriad of supports and services, and we're doing that. I also know that it's very frustrating for people because it doesn't look like anything's changing. And in some regard, it has gotten worse and it's more visible. And we can talk about Skid Row or Venice or Hollywood and those areas where people are really seeing these challenges, and say, hey, the numbers are showing that we're bringing people into permanent housing. Unfortunately, some years more people are becoming homeless than are being housed. What are the reasons for that? So right now we're in an eviction moratorium stage, and some of that has slowed down for some folks, but for someone with a serious mental health challenge who may just not be able to make it on their own, they may be becoming homeless. There's again a zillion reasons why someone might be out on the street. A lot of those people, you could ask them, they never thought it would happen to them, and there they are.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I do want to, by the way, I just want to point this out to everyone. I appreciate you're not hiding from it. You're not hiding from Venice. You're not avoiding Skid Row. You're bringing these things up. There's people I know who are very angry about the issue, and I'm not taking that anger away from anyone. I'm saying keep your anger, but please, maybe we add some empathy to that anger as well, and look at things from all perspectives, including people who may be down on their luck, unfortunately. But I do want to talk about mental illness. I do want to talk about substance abuse. I want to talk about housing in Los Angeles, the price of housing, the causal contributors maybe. But before we do that, let's talk about, you brought up how people can contribute. And I wanted to ask you about that. How is Path funded? How do you guys go about doing all this?
Sure, happy to talk about that. The predominant way that we are able to do the work we do is through programmatic funding. In Los Angeles, I mentioned earlier, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority. They're the multi-community authority that the federal government has said you need to have a continuum of care, coordinated continuum of care in order for us to fund things like these programs that are federally funded. So many of our programs are funded through Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, through the Department of Health Services. Several years ago, Dr. Katz, who's since departed, really kind of led the charge that housing is healthcare. And they recognized that the people experiencing homelessness were often, more than often, visiting emergency rooms dozens of times a year, and on average $6,000 to $8,000 just walking through the door. In terms of the expense of that, was much more cost effective to use healthcare dollars to find people permanent housing and supportive case management in that housing, so that they could reduce the number of visits to the ER from maybe 60 a year to 10. That saved the county so much money that everyone went, wow, let's do this. And so that program has expanded. So that's why we kind of have these two-pronged approach now for the majority of funding in Los Angeles. Other communities work differently and have different funding streams, but typically federal dollars are funded through the continuum of care. Having said that, PATH relies absolutely on private donations. We have fundraising events throughout the year to support the ancillary work that we do. I mentioned that we have some smaller contracts with different entities. We have contracts with some private groups who've really decided that this is how we can help, rather than standing off and saying, well, we're not going to invest in the community until you all fix this. How can we engage? So I don't mean to name drop, but for example, here in Hollywood, Hudson Pacific is a huge partner of ours. They provide resources, they provide volunteers, they connect with our development department regularly to figure out how we can work together to partner. I'm privileged to be on the board of an organization called Hollywood Forward, and that community organization brings together everyone. It's kind of a role model, if you will, for the service providers who've traditionally obviously been involved in this, to private sector business, to Kaiser Permanente and public sector and the government agencies, kind of bringing everyone together for conversation, for figuring out how, while we won't necessarily all agree on the root causes or the solutions to helping our homeless neighbors, that we have a problem and we need to work together. So all of the above, but most definitely, I mean, we cherish our volunteers and our donors who, our development department works tirelessly and creatively to figure out how we can inspire people to engage. The COVID pandemic's been a particularly tough time because we've had to limit some of the access due to safety reasons and social distancing and masking and things. Some of the typical activities that we had groups coming in and providing meals at our shelter, and we kind of had to slow that down or kind of figure out new ways to engage people. So, put your masks on, everybody. If you're able, get vaccinated, please, because the sooner we can kind of move beyond that, the sooner we can really help our neighbors, engage, our housed neighbors engage in helping our unhoused neighbors.
Yeah. So if someone wanted to donate, just go to your website, I assume, simplest way to do it.
Absolutely. There's a couple of electronic resources I'd love to talk about. One is our website, ePath, www.epath.org. So put an E in front of path.org, and look there for not only the exciting things that we're working on and how you could engage by donating or volunteering, but if you're a person who might be interested in looking for a career in social services or the most fulfilling work you can imagine. Sorry, I don't know where that came from, but
fulfillment.
Yeah, because we have so many open positions right now. The entire field is really begging people to join and figure out how they can professionalize this approach. So we're doing it, and we would love to have you join us. So do check out those resources. If you're also someone who, obviously you're engaged in your life in lots of ways, but you want to figure out how to help, feel free to donate if you're able to do that. Also, if you see someone experiencing homelessness, there's a portal that the Homeless Services Authority overseas, that helps our community report incidents of folks who may be needing assistance of an outreach team. It's not an instant connection. Typically an engagement happens within, a few days. And we know people are mobile, so it may not be. But if there's an encampment or someone who's been on your street corner for a while, or you just notice somebody who needs help, and that website is LA-HOP, LA-HOP, homelessoutreachportal.org. Or you can go to lahsa.org, and those websites will channel you to that space where you can make a report, you can say who you are, you can remain anonymous, you can get an update on what's going on. So I would strongly encourage people to, however they feel inspired to connect.
Okay, wonderful. And we'll get those links from you and put them down below.
Okay.
People didn't get a chance to write them down. Let me ask you, so in terms of volunteering or having people work for, we have financial donations, we have donations of food, or maybe even things beyond that I'm not thinking about. You had mentioned Trader Joe's just donating flowers. But I was also curious in terms of volunteering. A lot of people watching this, legally oriented. I'm a lawyer myself. I remember a long time ago, I was actually in discussion with Path about assisting and hosting some resume workshops or something of that nature. Is that space available? Most of my audience is going to be young professionals. Is that space available to volunteer their time to assist with career development, interview skills, resumes, and stuff like that?
Absolutely. Again, the pandemic has put a little bit of a kink in how we can develop and approach that. But we're on a Zoom right now. We can all figure out these electronic ways that we can connect with people as well. We've continued to mine those resources. If you have there are folks who are listening who really would like to figure out how what they're good at can be applied to or assist someone, would be happy to talk about that. Attorney pro bono work. I mean, so many of our neighbors experiencing homelessness have overarching legal challenges. We connect with the Inner City Law Center and Legal Aid and other organizations, but if there are attorneys who could offer insights or experience for particular issues, particularly around housing, that would be a thing we can talk about. If there are people who are professionals in the mental health or medical field, we can figure out how your wellness workshops or things could really enhance life at the shelters. We regularly engage medical professionals in the community at our interim sites to come on and do clinics and things like that if they're available and able to do that. So really, whatever you're good at, we're good at using and engaging in a way that would help our people, because people experiencing homelessness are people and they need everything, any kind of support that you can imagine, just like people in their homes need.
Yeah. What a few takeaways at this point. You have a housing first model. Your goal is not just to do X, Y, or Z, but you want to get people in permanent housing, which sounds fantastic. You're not denying some of the situations and concerns that the community may have, but instead you're saying, hey guys, if you have these concerns, let's resolve this issue together. I think there's quite a few takeaways about the organization. One of the other things I've noticed is you guys seem very dynamic, very fluid. So someone walks in, you're not rigid to say, hey, we only have A, B, and C available. We'll work around your situation to get you off the streets and where you need to be. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that's wonderful. That's a very wonderful thing. Let's hop to what I think is maybe one of the more curious aspects of all of this, which is what's contributing to the issue. And there are a couple of hot button topics. I'd like to go with them one by one. And the first one I'm just going to start with is cost of housing. In Los Angeles, there are these jokes about you can get a 200 square foot studio for $2,000 a month or something like that, something ridiculous.
It's the reality, not the joke.
Yeah, I know, right? How is that interfacing and interacting with the issue? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The idea of affordability, and in air quotes, of course, is is one that sits on my shoulder and nags at me because I don't live far from a brand new, very nice development with they had sliced off some units for affordability, and affordability was not in the range of the folks that I know and the income that they have in terms of a permanent home. So those folks will, many of the people we're working with will never be able to work or make enough income to support a typical market rate apartment in Los Angeles. I think that now the latest figure is over $45,000 or about $45,000 a year for an apartment, and that's not in in West Hollywood or on the West Side or even Hollywood. It's probably in South LA. So the challenge is the expense of that, and the reason that the market has those apartments where they are is because that's the supply of those apartments. So Path is working along with many others to kind of expand the housing stock, and also look to affordability and figure out how the resources that are available. So, for example, if someone were on a disability support because they're unable to work, typically those payments are $900 to around $900 a month. Even if someone has a housing voucher where they only have to pay 30% of their income toward their housing, and the federal voucher pays the rest, there's a top limit to how much the federal voucher will pay for a single one bedroom or a single apartment. That isn't really in market rate. It's kind of below. And also it leaves a person with $600 a month to survive, including utilities and all the other expenses of getting around in a city. It's basically a month to month, barely get by. There's a lot of people who are on general relief who don't have more than $120 a month of some sort of support income. So we're really challenged by those issues. And then again, the housing stock, which we see housing being built all the time, but it's not affordable.
Yeah.
And much of it is, and I understand that, and I know there are market forces that drive all of that personally, but it is a challenge when we're trying to help people find those spaces where they're able and willing to live safely. And many people have been traumatized in particular neighborhoods and can't return for their mental health to those places where there might be more affordable housing as well. We're looking into alternatives like shared housing, where dwellings people are able to live in a community setting, and that's becoming more popular even among those who can afford permanent housing, to live in a setting where they maybe share kitchen space or other amenities. So I think we have to crack our brains open to kind of continue to look at the evolving resources to push toward more affordable housing being built, to figure out how that can happen fairly and justly and equitably across Los Angeles. And we're also challenged in LA County with a very interesting system of government that has, there's a couple of big players like the city of Los Angeles, but there's also other cities around that may or may not be beholden to the same kind of regulations or rules. So there's a lot of thinking and resources being put into how we can kind of transcend all that, if you will, and or fix some of the issues that are obviously problematic, so that we can get these spaces built not only along the freeway where people have to breathe exhaust, but in safe neighborhoods with parks and other amenities that are clearly available in some neighborhoods and not others.
Yeah, I always see new housing being built in LA, but it's usually these very, very affluent West Hollywood condos or something in Santa Monica, some new community where you have to pay exorbitant amounts. So I get where you're coming from. So, but to be fair, we can say the rent is too damn high. That is simply just one of the. Would you say it's the biggest contributor to homelessness in Los Angeles right now?
Yeah, definitely the lack of affordable housing. That's number one. there are definitely some challenges for the folks with mental health challenges and things like that to be able to maintain. But to get them in, we have to have a place to put them, and without that, people will be on the streets.
Okay, so we have affordable housing, and that's one of the pillars here. Let's talk about, I know one of my friends specifically wanted me to speak with you about this, mental illness. How does that contribute? How much does that contribute? What do you think about that, and how do we respond to it?
Yeah, yeah, and I've touched on this earlier as well. The statistic that I heard was over 40% of the people experiencing homelessness have some sort of serious mental health challenge. There's a number of ways. First, if people have the support of the community and family and so forth, while that certainly depends on the individual and the family structure and things like that, they're often able to maintain some kind of permanent housing, whether that's with family or friends or in other communities. But for many people who experience mental health challenges, there's been some challenges with the family just getting to a point where they don't have the resources or the ability to care for that person, or they don't have family anymore, or they've had a mental break and they're not able to engage, and they're simply wandering around. We see that all the time in LA, and most people, I'm sure everyone who lives here has seen or maybe been on public transit or been in a public space where someone is clearly having a challenge with mental illness. I mean, you can pretty much tell when someone's not wearing pants in public. They're not doing that out of choice. They're doing that because there's something not functioning well for them. So the flip side challenge of those who experience mental illness to become homeless is those who are homeless then finding safe space and engaging with people who are willing to help, and then willing to house those folks. So we're working very hard to try to figure out those pieces. One of the pilot projects that's on the boards here in Hollywood is to create a system that modeled after the city of Trieste in Italy, where the community really embraces those who experience mental illness, and they've created spaces and community organization and just a wraparound, everybody in approach to helping people, rather than what really tends to be in our culture and society, a service-based, show up here, your case manager will help you, here's your medication, you'll talk to your psychiatrist, everyone already overwhelmed because the resources are already scarce, and then sends you on your merry way without really the embracing that's going to help you move forward. Mental illness is a big tent as well, and there's a lot of subtleties and differences between what people are experiencing. The diagnoses from depression or schizophrenia or post-traumatic stress or whatever it is. So there's going to be a different way of helping each individual that's not going to be a one-stop shop for everybody that's going to work. So it's extraordinarily complicated. For those who are experiencing mental illness, who've often been rejected or traumatized worse because of that, there's an added challenge of engaging and building trust with people to the point where they can engage the help that's really going to help move them forward. So our teams are trained to work with that, some more than others. We have multidisciplinary outreach teams that are out in the community that include trained mental health clinicians, so that they're able to help understand someone's diagnosis or help connect them to the mental health supports that will then build trust and help them move into permanent homes. Without that ongoing case management support, though, people often spiral into challenging situations where perhaps they have paranoia and they're not able to understand that the landlord is just there to help, or it really is, again, that individualized approach that's going to help people, and then the community-based sense of everybody's different, and we need to figure out how to support and engage people. Otherwise, we have what we have, and that is the person walking around without pants, among other things, you know. And it's heartbreaking and it's frightening. And I understand that can be that way too, but there's no more population more stigmatized in our culture and society than the people who experience mental illness. And it's heartbreaking because they're the people who need the help the most.
Yeah. And I gotta say, Steve, first off, thank you for leading with your heart, my man. You're a good man and you're doing good work. Like,
Thanks.
guys, he comes in to work every day and he helps people, and he sincerely helps people at one of the lowest points in their lives. Look upon this man with that in mind, and when he says, hey, we need people's help, can you please contribute, bear that in mind, and bear that in mind that you're helping both a shelter but also a place that's going to get people into permanent housing, a place that's going to get people job skills. You know,
Right.
I understand that there's people who maybe have mental illness or substance abuse. There's people who just need a little bit of help. And every one person you get off the street is a lifetime accomplishment. You get a badge every single time you do that. You guys do
Well,
that.
you save one life, you save the world. And the truth is that there's, just because someone has a mental illness doesn't mean they can't work or they can't engage or they can't be a, you know. And I think, you know, as a society, we have trashed the amazing gifts and resources of so many people because their skin color is wrong or their mental illness is a barrier or whatever. When, you know, I mean, Picasso, Van Gogh, these people were not normal, and yet now people are paying hundreds of dollars to stand in a room and watch Van Gogh's paintings projected on a wall and some fancy music. I'm like, hello, everybody. There's a million Van Goghs out there, and the cure for cancer is in the brain of a disabled person somewhere. You know, I mean, why are we not engaging this resource, encouraging it, and helping it grow and blossom? You know, and then if someone needs a little help because they act a little different sometimes, so what? I act a little different all the time.
You said something and you're like, you know, people with some kind of a mental disability can still be a productive part of society. As a joke through my head, I went, yeah, lawyers, we've all seen that already. But putting that humor aside, it's true. I mean, look, how many lawyers do I know who, and the stress and the anxiety of work is tough. And sometimes they want to relax. What do? They drink. That's a substance. Or they have whatever issue they're going through. They hire a therapist. What's that? That's mental health services. And you know, obviously there's a gradient here. You know, one might be more severe than the other. I'm trying to humanize the issue. I'm trying to bring the issue back on a ground level to remind us all that, yeah, when we step out of our homes, maybe there is a condition across the street that upsets us. And again, I'm not taking that away from anyone, but simultaneously, these are human beings with heartbeats inside these encampments. And like you said, just because someone's down on their luck, just because someone has mental health challenges, doesn't necessarily mean they can't be a fruitful part of society. A lot of billionaires are extreme people. A lot of the most successful people in society have some quirk. I learned that actually when I was at USC, the same year that I did work for your organization at USC, we were studying successful entrepreneurs. Before I did these studies, I assumed these people were perfect. Like, I don't know, they were born perfect and that's how they started Virgin Atlantic and that's how they became billionaires. No, these people are quirky sometimes. Maybe it just so happens that their differences yielded or directed them down some venue that in our capitalistic society we rewarded them with finances. Another person, on the other hand, maybe this is the greatest artist we've ever known, and we can't tell because the guy is sitting on concrete every day, and it's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good. Many huge musicians. These I know this because I'm a classical pianist. A lot of these classical musicians, I'm not going to name the names because I'm sure I'll get some of them wrong, but a lot of the people we hear about on a regular basis, some of these people were thought of as a little, different back in the day. And today we look at them as champions of artistry. So that says something. Let's also, so we have housing, that's not affordable. We have a mental illness challenge. And I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. And another thing that I hear a lot about is substance abuse. But let me come back to mental illness for just a moment. I have a theory that, especially since the pandemic, the entire United States is going through a collective mental health crisis. Now, I'm not saying the mental health crisis the average person living in Beverly Hills is dealing with is remotely close to what someone else is dealing with. This is not an equivalency that I'm making. But if we're going to talk about mental illness, I want to ask you from the standpoint of the people experiencing homelessness and that issue. Is there an uptick in mental illness, or is it just that the way society is functioning now that more of these people are just ending up on the streets?
Yeah, I would say it's complicated. I really appreciate you pointing out that some people have basically positions of privilege where they have the resources to address whatever's going on, and clearly others don't. And I would agree with you, though it's anecdotal at this point, but I'm sure there'll be studies that COVID has driven us all to the brink. And there ain't a day that goes by when something else happens, and my head would explode, because and then I come home, and where you have to isolate. Now you don't have to isolate. And then it's better. Now it's not better. So this kind of thing is definitely wearing on everybody. And we see it in our politics. We see it in our, and our social media, which, while I'm addicted, it's exacerbating as well. And so the full ramification, I don't think, there'll be books written a decade from now. But again, I think if we can figure out how to kind of give everyone, not just the people in our own spheres and with our own, level of privilege, the space to be human. And I can't really say that I've seen an uptick in, let me put it to you this way. In the wake of COVID, we definitely see a rise in the acuity of people experiencing homelessness. They're sicker. They've been homeless longer. Their situations are more dire because the resources have been, there have been new resources, and that's a good thing, and we're thankful for those. There's also been some changes in systems. One small example: if someone wants anything in society, you need to have an identification. Most people who are experiencing homelessness, it's impossible to hold on to anything, because the minute you turn your back on it, it's gone. Or you have a mental health challenge that you can't figure out how to keep an ID, so you need an ID. Well, you can't go to the DMV to get, you couldn't anyway for a long time, go to the DMV to get a new ID. And then there's all these limits to accessibility and so forth. So something as simple as that has, the challenge of a case manager helping someone get an ID has increased. So that's one small example of in each step of the process, moving people from the streets into homelessness. That's complicated things, and that has an effect on people where you think they gave up before, and now they have more challenges and more. You can understand why people's hands get thrown up and they're like, I'm just going to live here, And I give my homeless neighbors some credit for creativity and resourcefulness. I mean, there are people I walk by who, and I personally engage people because I work with folks. It's not frightening to me. I normalize. I look at people in the eye, and I don't think you can overestimate the power of meeting someone's gaze and just letting them know you're human, they're human. I know I'm not going to give you, some of us have made the choice that we don't hand out money because it's not really helpful. To some others, they'll go and buy someone a meal. Whatever you can do, or however you can do that to help someone feel more human, is going to do two things. It's going to help that person, obviously, and help them feel more human. But guess what? You're feeling like whatever because of all this pressure on you. You're going to suddenly feel like a little more human too. I'm pretty sure the Grinch felt better about himself after his heart grew 3 sizes that day. And I know I do, and it's not about me, and it's not about doing it to make me feel better, but ultimately a rising tide rises all the boats, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me 2 more topics that I want to hit, which is substance abuse and veterans. Those seem to be the 2 other things that come up a lot. Let me just say as an aside, Veterans in particular, that one hurts me, that we ask people to go and, be the enforcement arm, let's just say it, of the United States as part of our military. I know that's a very politically correct way to put it, but at the end of the day, we ask people to wear our country's flag, go to other parts of the world away from their families, risk their lives. And then they come back here and, thanks, see you later. And I can only imagine the PTSD. I can only imagine various things that come along with that. My heart would sink to think that, I don't want to say the United States is using its veterans, putting them through a grinder and then just throwing them out the other end without any support. I'm not going that far, but my heart does feel guilt for what's happening to our veterans. What say you?
Yeah, thank you. And you know what, I was remiss when I mentioned that LASA and the Health Services Department are if I gave the impression they're the only two places where resources come, because another of our largest funders is the Veterans Administration. So they're very much in tune with the need for support. And there are two large VA programs. One is called the Supportive Services for Veteran Families, and that's a kind of a rapid rehousing and quick connection to support people, to get them the resources for those who are service connected, or even people who have an honorable or a discharge that's neutral from the services, to get them the support they need. And then the other is VASH, or Veteran Administration Supportive Housing. And that's an ongoing case management and voucher support system for veterans experiencing homelessness, to get them into permanent housing and then to support them ongoing with case management support, with a housing voucher, a federally funded voucher. And then those programs are funded, and we have case managers who work specifically in those programs to continue to help people connect with VA services, the health services and things like that. So there are good resources, and the hopeful news in terms of veterans is we have seen a reduction in the numbers of people on the streets who are veterans. On the flip side, as you well put, the privilege that allows some people to not go, and that others do go and fight or wear our country's flag around the world, they do return oftentimes with kind of thanks a lot, and we really honor you and appreciate you, but the mental health challenges that have resulted from experiencing the traumas and things like that are formidable. So we want to be attentive to those resources and how we can continue to help our veterans.
Let me ask you, what portion would you say, or maybe you don't have the numbers for this, but what portion of the homeless population in Los Angeles would you say are veterans?
Yeah, I don't have that number off the top of my head. I'd be talking out of class. But it's my understanding that the percentage has decreased because we've had these resources now, and we've been able to help veterans very specifically through some programs. And that's not to say that there aren't a lot of people out there who still need help. And the mental health challenges that our veterans experience often drives them to be wanting to be more independent or not engaged in a permanent home. It's very interesting and very complex. I mean, one of the stories that I find fascinating and interesting is, as people move into permanent housing, we've had people who move into an apartment, and then because of the feeling of being enclosed, are really kind of so uncomfortable there, they leave, and our case managers have been able then to sort of help them say, well, why don't you try one night a week in your new place? And then and then after a time they acclimate and they become more able to stay in those spaces. But we've had people set up tents in their living rooms because they've been living in a tent so long, that's where they can sleep. And I'm used to my bed, and I think others would understand that too. So it's just an interesting intersection of the mental health challenges, the financial resources that are available or not available. And I know there's always room for growth, but we are honored and privileged to participate in the programming that the Veterans Administration does fund for our veterans.
Let me ask you a question, Steve. How much more time do you have? It's 5:14 right now. Do we have you till at least 5:30?
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. Because I'm loving this. I'm being edified. I'm learning a ton here. So I appreciate you taking time.
Thank
Sorry
you.
about
I
this.
appreciate you giving
Yeah.
me the platform.
No, you deserve. You more than deserve. If I could put you on the biggest platforms on the planet, I would, because I think you deserve it. I think the world of your organization.
Thank you.
Um, the way you're describing your services, this is the weird thing. Okay, I always want to walk into a place and have that place cater to me, all my needs, wants, and desires. There's a way to do that. It's called being a billionaire in Las Vegas, where the concierge, whatever you want. You want a Rolls Royce today? We got that for you. Oh, you wanted lobster came, from Maine, or you wanted this thing from France. Don't worry, someone will take care of that for you because they know they're going to get paid. Interestingly, your organization doesn't sound all that different. It sounds like you wrap around the needs of your clients. And
Sure.
what a mind trip that is. Hey, you want that experience? Either you got to be a billionaire in Vegas, or you got to work with an organization that helps the homeless. I think you deserve a lot of credit for that. And I think that's a labor intensive thing to do,
It
right?
is. It is, and thank you for that compliment. That's lovely. Two things that come to mind. One is that PATH is a unified organization. We're a single nonprofit. Well, our development arm has its own thing, but overall, we're a unified organization. But our funding comes into programmatically. So internally, we work very hard to create we're PATH, and we're going to help you. You don't really need to worry about which program we're going to plug you into. You can, I mean, obviously you're going to know that based on the paperwork and the documentation and the support and the case management or your needs. But, whether it's a rapid rehousing or an intensive case management program or street outreach or interim housing, you're part of the PATH, and we're here to help you. And we're going to plug you in and get you connected and work with you no matter where you are on your journey to help you move toward permanent housing. But I wanted to, what you mentioned triggered a story in my head, because one of our shelters is literally in the shadow of a luxury hotel in Hollywood. And I had a conversation with someone one day that was remarkable for a number of reasons. And I mentioned that, when folks come into our shelter, they're so often traumatized. They're not even able to kind of express their needs or their desires as a human being. You and I walk in a restaurant, and if it's cold, we send it back. If we don't like it, they gave us the wrong condiment, it's gone. So one of the things I said to this gentleman I was talking to was, I consider it a triumph when someone in our shelter starts complaining about the food, because that means they feel human again and they feel safe to be able to express their feelings and be a real person again. And yeah, there's a part of me, I'm human, that says, we're helping you. You should like what we're doing and not complain. But again, my heart really is happy in the end, because they feel safe enough to do that, and we'll do whatever we can to make the experience better for them. But the response from this person, because I pointed to the fancy hotel and I said, anyone calls the concierge there if the towels are too crunchy, and that concierge is going to do backflips to get them the downy soft ones they really want. I said, how is, people are human. And the response was, well, they pay for that. And, and that's privilege, speaking for you, because if we can give somebody the sense that they're human and deserve a decent meal and a towel, just because they live and breathe and have a heartbeat, and I think then we're on our way to solving this issue. But if we're going to say, hey, you can't afford it, too bad, then we're going to have what we have, and it's only going to get worse. So
Yeah, it's I'm contemplating whether or not I should make a Star Trek Deep Space Nine reference here, because this goes deep into the nerdiness, but it has a value. There's an episode of the show. There's a alien species. I know I'm making this is a made up make believe show, but I think it was intelligently done. And the species would send out its most I don't want to say weak, but its most helpless forms of its species out into the universe, and it would monitor what other species did with the people who were with the creatures that were most vulnerable, the creatures that were most helpless. And this species graded other species based on how they would treat the most vulnerable versions, how they would treat the most helpless people. And this is a very advanced alien race and all this stuff, and they're sending baby creatures all over the place. Some people disregard the baby creatures, some people nurture the baby creatures, and this advanced alien species would take note of that. Let's now that to prove everyone I'm not crazy for bringing this up, think about here on planet Earth in Los Angeles. How do we treat those who are most vulnerable? How do we treat those who are the most helpless? And what does that say about us? What rating do we give ourselves based on what it is we have and have not done? It hurts my heart a little bit as I make that rather strange, nerdy connection, but I think there's value in there and it hurts my heart. Let me touch upon, let's go from veteran to substance abuse. And before we do, a quick anecdote. I was watching a mini documentary. A guy came back from, I don't remember if it was Iraq or Afghanistan. On the last week of his tour of duty, his superior was killed in some kind of an IED attack or something of that nature. This documentary showed that this guy was like 19, you know, I'm nearly 40. This guy is 19. He's in war in Iraq. Okay. It showed what that did to this 19-year-old's mind. And every night he would come out, he would start drinking to the point where he was blacked out. Then he would start smoking marijuana, and he'd go back in the kitchen, and they videotaped him secretly. And this is what he was doing in the kitchen. I forget the guy's name. Let's just call him Sergeant Patrick. And he takes another shot glass up, and trust me, he didn't need another shot. But he went, "Why did they have to take you away from me, Sergeant?" And then he would take a shot, and then he'd pour another thing. Is it was just your last week, and he would take another shot. It was so hard to watch. You know, I can only imagine trauma begets substance abuse. And I alluded to this earlier. Lawyers drink when they get nervous and anxious. What's going on in substance abuse in Los Angeles, in particular with the homeless community?
Yeah, but thank you for bringing that up. There are actually hopeful therapies for people who have experienced that kind of thing. When you said a 19-year-old, what came to my mind was that the science behind the development of the human brain is that the prefrontal cortex, which is the rational decision-making part of your brain, doesn't even fully develop until you're in your mid-20s, which explains a lot of behavior for people, and some it never does. But the point is, for an 18-year-old to experience that kind of trauma has derailed that whole development.
Yeah.
So back to your question about mental health and homelessness. One of our I'm going to start crying again. One of my case managers is a person in recovery. And, he told, when you're so desperate that a $5 hit of heroin is the best freaking feeling you've ever had in your life, what's going to stop you from continuing that?
Yeah.
And while each hit is progressively less effective, and so you look for other drugs to make your life bearable. I witnessed the unbelievable suffering of human beings every day. We all do. I remember after a rainstorm, I saw someone who's clearly had a mental health challenge, literally walking around in sock foot mud puddles. The first thing I thought was, that obviously that person needs help, but the first thing I thought for myself was, I wouldn't last 10 minutes without something. So of course, the experience of homelessness, the helplessness, the trauma, all pushes people into that. There's also an element that's preying on that because there's a market for drugs among people who are experiencing homelessness, as well as the general community, obviously, and they're really, I don't have a statistic in my mind in terms of the number of people who became homeless because of an addiction or substance abuse, or had that happen at the same time. I really like to think of things in terms of co-occurrence. That there's just all these things. There's certain ways that certain drugs play out in people's lives. A meth addiction does things differently to you than a heroin addiction. There's, but a lot of it is really just about numbing and survival.
Yeah.
There's lots of studies now showing that, veterans coming back from Vietnam who were regularly using opiates to survive came back into a community that was embracing them and helping them and weren't addicted. So what does that mean? I think it means that if we can build a supportive community and that people feel cared for and safe and loved, that it won't make the drug or the addictions disappear entirely, But I think a large number of people will simply not need that post-surgery. And they tell you this all the time, they give people opioids to maintain, to manage the pain. But if you need that to manage pain, you're not going to be addicted to it once you're done. But the problem, of course, is that people don't stop. But so how, the big question, I guess, for me and for all of us is how do we, how do we understand that kind of research and that kind of understanding of the effects of drugs on the human condition? How do we support people who are experiencing that? What challenges? How do we connect them to services and communities that can help, like 12-step groups that are very effective for some and not so effective for others? What works, and how do we not further stigmatize, also not as a society continue to operate in a way that encourages that, and figure it out. I don't know, it's unbelievably complicated, but I think it needs to be a multi-pronged approach. The individual and their specifics and the needs that they have, and their healing from the trauma, the addiction, the mental health challenges or physical health challenges. And then also, culturally, societally, how are we dealing with this?
Yeah.
And things change. I mean, 10 years ago, if you told me we were going to be able to walk into the dispensary on the corner that's not far from here, when I walk in, I shouldn't tell you I walk in, but when I walk by, it's like an Apple store.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this fancy place now, and I'm like, what? You used to have to sneak around in your college dorm, so we have the ability to change, is what I'm saying, and change our mindset, change our approaches, change our help for people who need assistance.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say two things, and then I know you've been very generous with your time, Steve. You've been with us for a long time today. I wanted to say this again, just to humanize things for anyone who's listening at home. You ever participate in retail therapy? You ever have a glass of wine? You ever have a night out with your friends just to forget about? These are all coping mechanisms, whether you're adding to cart on Amazon.com or having a shot of tequila or whatever it might be. If that's where you are in the comfort of your own home, imagine what coping mechanisms you may develop if you are on the streets. And I hope that helps humanize the whole situation. Steve, that's something I've gained from you during this last hour and a half that we've been speaking. You've enlightened me. You expanded my perspective. Look, I think I'm just like anyone else. Sometimes I see things out there, I get upset. But having spoken to you today, I think I'm going to get less upset, and I think I'm going to be significantly more empathetic. And I wanted to, close with asking you this question. People are listening at home right now. If I said to you, Steve, there's one thing they can do right now that would be the most helpful to path. And look, if it's something as straightforward as donating, so be it. But what would that one thing be?
Wow. I would think, look in the mirror and say, what do I have? What is it that I have that I can share? Whether that is a donation, which of course, we gladly accept, whether it's a case of toilet paper or some shampoo that makes sense. Reach out to our development team to coordinate. Or if you feel compelled to make a life change and to, commit, time to this in a professional way, then look on our website for that. Be an advocate in your community, and don't give up hope, because that's something I'm concerned sometimes. And, we talk about all these multiple challenges with mental health and affordability and all of this, and it feels overwhelming. Like people are like, and all I keep seeing is it looks like it's getting worse. First of all, one person at a time is being housed. Over 20,000 people last year were moved into permanent housing from homelessness in Los Angeles County last year. So don't give up hope. The people who are doing this, and we need your help. We need your support. We need your full engagement, politically, economically, whatever. Do it, but also don't give up hope, and keep keep applauding, keep supporting, keep looking for those ways to help those most vulnerable.
Steve, you're clearly a humanitarian. it's in your heart. I even just gave you an opportunity just to be straightforward and ask for donations, but you said, look, first take a look in the mirror. And it's right, because if someone does take a look into the mirror, their humanity may come to the forefront. And maybe you get the donations, maybe you get someone who comes in and volunteers time, maybe someone offers X, Y, and Z, someone gets involved in the community. You're clearly a man who's not just here. This is not some corporate 9-to-5 job for you. I can tell your heart's sincerely in it. Path is lucky to have you, and we are lucky to have Path. So I know you've been very generous with your time today, sir. If you got anything else left to say to the audience, please go ahead.
Yeah, give us your money. No, I'm just kidding.
There it is.
There it is. No, thank you so much. The time is my pleasure to and privileged to be able to talk about the work that we do. And it helps me kind of refocus and re-energize as well, because believe me, we don't all come home from this feeling like, yeah, I got to help somebody today. We're often disheartened by what we're reading and what we're seeing and by the reactions of the community. So, and I understand it's challenging, and I understand we're frustrated with our political leaders and with what we think, what's going on. But really, we can do this, and I think we're doing this, and we can do it better. So let's focus on that.
Steve, thank you. And everyone at home, please check the links below.